Excuse me. Welcome to the monthly meeting of the Board of Finance. We're going to get going here. Tuesday, June 2nd. Can we all stand up for the pledge, please? Mary, can you lead us off?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, again, welcome to the monthly meeting. Mr. Flynn is traveling, so I get the honors to chair this meeting tonight. Is my mic on, Jerry? Can you hear me okay? Okay. First, are there any questions, comments, concerns from the board on the agenda? Tonight, we're going to hear from the tax collector. We are going to hear from Director of Public Works, who said he would be here tonight. We will hear from our CFO, and we'll hear from IT as well. So any questions, concerns? Then let's start the meeting with item number 1 on the agenda. To hear, consider, and act upon the suspense list for the tax collector, where the Board of Finance is being asked to approve the transfer of tax accounts amounting to $123,000, or $123,861.76 to the suspense tax book. So that's the motion. Can Mr. Mottola, can I have a second? Mr. DeWitt, so this item is now before us. Welcome.
Thank you. This is an annual pilgrimage for me to the Board of Finance. State statute requires that the tax collector every year deem what accounts are uncollectible, in the sense that we have tried our due diligence to collect the money, and for various reasons we feel that the money is not going to be collected in the office with what we normally do for collection process. We do search names, locations, trying to update addresses. Some of the suspense list is people who are deceased. Some are bankruptcies. Some are businesses that go out of business. People who move out of state, especially with motor vehicles. We don't have any way of forcing them to pay us in Connecticut. So the tax collector's office, we go through, as the year progresses, we keep a list. If we mail something 3 or 4 times and it continues to come back and we still can't find an address, we feel that there's better uses for our resources than to keep mailing things out that we know are not going to get some to the person that has the delinquency. So, having said that, that's how we compile these lists. And when something is put on suspense, it takes it out of the collectible amount in that grand list year. So it gives a more precise amount for us to budget on, believing that what we do on that collectible list is indeed collectible. But when something is put in suspense, we still have the 15-year statutory limitation to collect on it. We turn it over to a collection agency who skip traces throughout the entire country. Once they find it, then they get paid and we get paid 100% of what is owed us. This year we have collected from July of 2014 till May 31st, $72,000 on motor vehicle tax bills that we were unable to collect on. So basically that's how a suspense book works. The statutes require us to submit the list to you for your approval yearly, and then our suspense, this is added to the previous suspense accounts that we have in our office.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments from the board?
Just checking.
You checking the list?
We've all checked that our names aren't on the list. I'll make the motion.
Yeah. If your name's on a list, I suggest you keep it quiet.
If my name's on a list, then it'd be a problem with your office not being able to find me, so.
Just a question or two. If we go on back to, I guess, page 12, 13, and there's a couple of businesses that for, let's say, 2 years, like 2011, 2012, that were behind on their taxes before they went out of business. So what do we do when a business starts to fall behind over a year?
We start by contacting them, obviously, with delinquent statements. We do contact them personally. If they do not respond to us, we put them in what's called an alias tax warrant, where we give it to a state marshal who researches to see if they can find their bank account, because we have the power to seize the money from the bank account. Most likely, if we can't get it, it's usually because they're either out of business or we can't identify anything to be able to take the funds that are owed. Even if we know the principal owner of the business, we can't take their funds. It has to be in the name of the business.
Okay.
So that's basically how we start with personal property. It is by far, personal property is the hardest to collect when people just refuse to pay you or they go out of business. And we file what's called a UCC lien with the state of Connecticut, which means that we file a lien on the personal property within the business that they use to conduct business, so that we can seize that if they go to sell it, we have a lien on it. But again, very difficult. I think in the 3 years I've been in Fairfield, we've only collected on one UCC lien that we have filed.
If a business basically goes out of business, goes bankrupt, but then changes their name and you have the same owner, do we have any recourse at that point?
Absolutely not. If they change, the only thing we can do is if we go into that business, if we can prove that the actual articles that are on their declaration in the assessor's office are the same articles that were in the other business, we can try and collect those even though it's on a new business. But if somebody goes in, I had this happen in another town, where a restaurant closed, same owner, he gutted the restaurant, put all new fixtures in, all new tables, chairs, kitchen, opened it under a new name. There was an article in the paper, so you knew it was him, and there was still no recourse to collect on the old business.
Okay. The amount, 123,000 approximately, is that generally, is that right in the ballpark of last year or years past?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
It's depending on the first year that I came here, I didn't have a lot of time to go through your file, and I didn't want to put things on that were not relative, so I think that year was 83,000. So that was a little bit less than what we're doing now. But now we have people that in the office, that's part of their job description, is to go through all of the return mail. As of right now, our personal property collection for this year is 99.26%. So we have really perfected it with what we can do and what we can work around.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Any questions from the public? Then if not, it's back to the board, and this motion's on the table, so we are ready to vote. All those in favor to approve the transfer of the tax accounts amounting to $123,861.76 to the suspense book, say aye. Any nays? Abstentions? It's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excuse me, is there some of these signatures required there by the Board of Finance on that?
Usually what we do is, we certainly can sign it, but a copy of the minutes is actually sufficient for what the statute requires.
So So we did our job.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, item number 2 is a bonding resolution in regards to the purchase of 908 Fairfield Beach Road. So I need to read this. So fill up your water glass, because it's going to take a little while. I do. I have to read this, correct? Mr. Mayor? I have to read this, correct?
The whole thing?
Okay. Let me go. Mr. Tetra?
I make a motion we waive the reading of
Okay. I'll take, can I have a second? Mr. Mottola. What I'll do is, I'll just read the resolution, not the whole thing, just some top of the actual bonding resolution. So what we have before us is a resolution appropriating $275,000 for the cost associated with the acquisition of real property and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. Can I have a motion? Mr. Stone, second. Mr. DeWitt, so this is now before us. Thank you very much.
Good evening. As you all know, my name is Stanton Lesser, and seated next to me is Brian Carey, who is the new Conservation Director of the town of Fairfield.
Welcome.
How are you?
I also
Thank you.
have some esteemed gentlemen sitting here. Kevin Gumper, who's the Chairman of the Conservation Commission, Peter Penzer, who represents the other owners of the property, and should we require him, or should you have questions, Tom Stanky.
Yes, welcome,
You all know.
everybody. Thank you.
Very briefly, this is, you're appropriating funds to purchase a piece of property at 908 Fairfield Beach Road. I'm going to give you a brief history. Some time ago, the town inherited a 1/3 interest in this property from one of the 3 owners of the property. Some time ago, Attorney Penzer, who represents the other 2 owners, came to the town and said, look, we'd like you either to buy us out, or we'd like to put the property on the market and have it sold, and we'll take 2/3 and you take 1/3. The property was, it was discussed with First Selectman Tetro, who asked that it be sent to Land Acquisition Committee. We took it to the Land Acquisition Committee. I think they voted unanimously that this was a good thing. It was sent to Conservation. They would like this piece. So we went ahead and signed a contract. Mike Tetro wanted an appraisal done, so they went and had an appraisal done. Appraisal came back at $400,000, so we made an agreement to purchase the 2/3 interest for $268,000. It's been through, as I said, Land Acquisition. Conservation wants it, and it went through the Board of Selectmen, who at the time did not know whether or not Conservation Commission was going to pony up any funds out of the H. Smith Richardson Trust. We now know that they're going to put $75,000 from the trust into the purchase of this, so I'm going to ask that your resolution be amended to only appropriate $200,000. The resolution does provide that you approve the use of the $75,000 from the trust inasmuch as the money is coming out of principal of the trust itself requires Board of Finance approval for that. You're not appropriating the money, but you're going to approve that it come out of the trust. This is a piece of property on the north side of Fairfield Beach Road. It's about 2 acres. It does constitute a building lot, and Conservation, I know, wants it for open space because it gives access to the marshes there, to Pine Creek. And that's really all I have to say about it, and I have everyone here to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you. Question from the board, Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
To Fairfield, and welcome to the Conservation Department. So the Conservation Department would like this piece of land for open space, or you just don't want someone to build on it since we've determined that it is a building lot?
No, there were issues after Hurricane Sandy where there was a great deal of flotsam and jetsam that was basically deposited on the marsh. And although there are private lots that back up to the marsh, most of the residents don't have the resources to clean the marsh. So over time, this became an issue, and the town was having to go secure temporary easements in order to enter the marsh and clean areas that the residents were requesting. Routinely, the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection provides services to the town in the way of mosquito management, which requires them access to the marsh on, sometimes it's annually, sometimes it's more than that, where they come in and actually re-ditch areas of the marsh to make sure that the marsh is properly draining so that there isn't mosquito breeding habitat. Those issues in the past have created a problem because we've had to go get temporary easements or cross private property through agreements. So that's one issue. The other issue is it does provide some recreational benefit, and currently it provides parking access to actually Penfield Reef. If you drive by the property, you will see that people, currently park there and access the reef, which is a public access
on the
area.
land?
Yeah, on the land. So people do use that for parking, and that's something that would be resident parking potentially in the future.
Just so you'll know, this was also submitted to TP&Z under state statutes. They have to render a report, and they don't approve it or disapprove it per se. They render a report to the RTM, which will ultimately vote on this. If for some reason they voted it down, then the RTM would have to approve it by a 2/3 vote. Other than that, it's just a majority vote. So if TPC says yes, then it just goes to the RTM on a majority vote. The other thing is that under our code, unless the RTM designates this property as something else, which I don't believe it will, by default, it becomes open space and under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission.
Will this open space require any town funds to maintain? Are we going to make parking spaces? Or are we just going to, I don't know if they're just parking on grass here, or is it?
It's just a curbside pull-off at this time. I mean, there will be some costs associated with the maintenance of it, but those costs would be, the benefit would outweigh those costs. I mean, it's not going to be something that's going to inundate the department and require us to come back to this board and ask for more money, per se, to, increase our maintenance budget because of this. The other issue is there's numerous land use approvals that would be required to basically come forward. They'd need wetland permits and things like that. So, those are also costs that would be borne by the town reviewing those and going to other commissions. So, looking at what happened after Sandy, it was all the commissions that we discussed this matter with felt that it was in the best interest of the town to basically acquire this parcel going forward. Just because the issues that arose during Sandy, this would help streamline any future disaster response.
Mr. DeWitt?
I'm good, thank you. I didn't know if the chairman had a comment.
I would
Yes.
make one comment on this. The town currently owns a piece right next door to this piece in question. But the piece that the town now owns is landlocked. It doesn't go out to Fairfield Beach Road. So this piece would provide access not only to the creek, but to the piece right next door. So basically, you're getting twice the bang for the buck on this.
Okay. Did you have any other
Is
comment
that-
you'd like to make? You can sit down and...
And I just have one follow-on question. Is that piece of land designated as open space today?
Which piece? The other piece?
The piece we currently own?
I believe so. I believe so, because as Stan pointed out, everything that's not designated something else that's owned by the town is by default open space.
In open space, Mr. Lesser, means that nothing can ever be built on it, correct? We can't
No,
sell
it
open
means-
space,
it-
right?
It means it's under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission for
Oh,
whatever
okay.
they want to do it with it.
Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Claire?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. Right now, it's zoned as residential land, correct?
Correct.
So in order for us to use it as parking, would we have, to get zoning approval?
No.
No. As residential land, we
You
can
can
use it
have
for
an
parking.
empty lot
and
and
access.
just have an empty lot, yes.
Okay. And then I have a question. When I look at, we have the field card from the assessor. And so I guess what I want to know is that value is only 121,000. So why is there such a difference between the appraised value and the assessor's value?
The value is, I don't know where the assessor got their value from. Our value is based on the fact that it is, in fact, a building lot, as we had that determined by Jim Went in the zoning office, and he said, yes, in his opinion, this would be a building lot, and that's what a building lot is worth on Fairfield Beach Road. I believe that the town assessor has assessed it just as open space and just as vacant land, I should say.
So my question is, we already, the third we own is a different piece, that's...
No.
Or it's
No.
part of this
No.
piece?
That's-
But we own a piece next to it?
We own a piece right next door, but that
Okay.
piece does not touch Fairfield Beach Road. It's a rear lot.
We own a 1/3 interest in this piece, which has been valued at $400,000, so we're paying 2/3 of that to the other two owners.
Okay, so, but the other two owners probably can't go out and sell it without our third, because then it wouldn't be a building lot, if we say we want to just keep 1/3?
No, there's
They
actually
can
a
force
lot of law
They can
on
force
this.
a sale.
They can force the sale of this. They can go to court and require us to sell it. It's-
Okay.
What's called a
But we can't
partition
just
action.
buy our 1/3 from them? Or, I mean, just have it subdivided, I
No.
guess, is what?
It
No?
would be sold as one piece.
This is not subject to being subdivided.
Okay,
It wouldn't work. If it were 20 acres, we could do that, but a small piece like this, you can't subdivide
okay,
in kind.
okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, the exact answer to Ms. Claire's question, the assessor's office does have this as a non-buildable lot. It's not a matter of ownership. They had in there as a non-buildable lot,
Which is why the 121?
yes.
Oh, let's let the real estate guy.
121 is 2010.
Well, that's not the issue. I mean, it didn't jump 300% because of inflation for the last 5 years. It's a matter of,
He thought it was an unbuildable lot,
Right,
looked at it as an unbuildable lot, but a buildable lot, but it
Yeah.
is a buildable lot.
The appraisal was done as if it is a building lot. And
This-
they had a surveyor go out, lay out a house on the
yeah,
lot. It
I
fits on the lot.
raised I raised the
It's the
question
requirements.
initially, when this issue first came up, and I looked at the appraisal fee and the appraised rate, appraisal, and we had discussions with Jim Went, as Stanton indicated, and it was determined that it is a buildable lot.
Okay.
Well, this card also says that this assessed value is for only 2/3 of the value of the parcel. See another card for the other third. So the 121.2 is the 2/3 value of a non-buildable lot, right?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clary, you all set? Mary, you set
I guess
for now?
for now, yeah.
And Mr. Mottola?
So, I don't know if you can answer this question to anyone. It's technically a buildable lot?
Yes.
But is it a buildable lot?
Yes.
So you could build a house on that
Yes.
property? And so, I guess to the conservation director, so you believe it's in the best interest of the town of Fairfield for the town to acquire this property and forego taxes on this property for many, many years, that, forever, basically?
Yeah, I mean, because of the issues we run in with the storm during the last Storm Sandy, I don't see how you resolve those without basically acquiring some piece of property along that marsh front. The other thing is that this is a unique opportunity in that, you know, a lot of these areas along Fairfield Beach Road do not come up for sale, and the fact that the town already owns a 1/3 interest in the property is kind of like a built-in savings. if you can look at it that way. If this were to come up again and, you know, the board and the commissions deemed that, you know, it was actually a necessity to own a piece of property along Fairfield Beach Road, we'd be looking at even higher costs to the town in order to kind of rectify the situation that we had in the past. So, you know, this is kind of coming in at a perfect time. You know, the trust that we have is actually, you know, paying for a portion of it, and we own a third of it. So all of that put together, we're actually getting somewhat of a savings built in since we have an interest in the property.
So after the storm, when we had to gain access to the creek, what, you said we had to get temporary easements from property owners?
Agreements or temporary easements, yes.
Did that cost us money, Stanton, do you know?
Typically, it doesn't. We have an agreement. People are usually pretty nice when we have to do that, and they give us permission, and we say we're going to restore the property to whatever condition it was before. And, you know, we hold them harmless for many
But there's a
damage.
cost associated with that if you have to restore the property to a...
Yeah, oh, sure.
Okay. And there's time, and you can't guarantee that people are going to give you permission. And, you know, during period after a storm, you know, that's time spent focused on a task that may be negated by a purchase of this type of parcel.
Thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, the RTM, when they have it, they can make it active or passive, correct?
I believe that they can make that a designation
It's
as
their
to what they want to
designation,
do.
so
Yeah.
they could make it active.
Yeah.
And have access to the creek and make it a launch and all sorts of stuff.
I don't know what kind of access it gives to the creek, but
Yeah, I mean, that particular area of the creek is, you know, high marsh. I mean, so, you know, you wouldn't have a good launch out into the creek. And the area, one of the reasons why the access to that area is kind of limited is because there's actually a dike that limits the flow of water out to South Pine Creek, where the WPCA's water, you know, outfall comes over. They're in the process of actually fixing that.
Yeah, we just approved money for that.
Yeah, so that was
Yeah.
one of the reasons that we didn't have access into there, because that dike also prohibits access. But, you know, if it, you know, as a viewing point or bird watching, you know, those are all things that could be considered as a benefit. But again, you know, historically, the area, right or wrong, has been used as parking for people trying to access Penfield's Reef. And if you were to, you know, if this were to become a building lot and sold, you know, as a building lot, that would be an issue for, I know, a number of people in town who do come down there and use that as, you know, an unimproved access over, you know, coastal access area to the marsh.
Does anybody believe we're getting like a phenomenal deal on this? Because $400,000 value on a 2-acre lot on Fairfield Beach Road,
Yeah.
I didn't think that that would exist. And I think that the appraiser was struggled to get that number because if you look at the comps on the appraisal, there isn't one on Fairfield Beach Road.
yeah.
There isn't one.
Look,
And there's been lots for sale, tear downs and all that stuff, especially with Storm Sandy. It's just, I think it's great. I think we should buy it. We should buy it as soon as possible and sign the contract and give them the money because we will never lose money on this property ever. This is the biggest bargain, I think, out there.
just so you know, the contract has been signed, subject to all these approvals, so.
I think it's a great
I
deal.
think you've
I'm
hit it
glad
on
we
it.
can use it for what we plan on using it for, but I couldn't believe it was only appraised for 400,000. I tried to look at the comps to figure out how that was happening, and then it became starkly, I became starkly aware that the fact that they didn't find one comp on Fairfield Beach Road at all.
And the town's share of this, the town's actual out-of-pocket is $200,000.
Yeah.
So,
What's the $7,000, the extra amount for? I understand title insurance fees, legal fees. What's banking fees?
I don't think it's going to be $7,000. I was asked.
I didn't understand what banking fees are we paying here?
I think the charges are going to be title insurance and the title search.
Okay.
And my fees, which is going to be it's all going to be well under $7,000.
And Stan, can you go over to me one more time what the approved amount that's coming out of the trust and what we plan on bonding?
The approved amount is $75,000, and so you're bonding $200,000 even.
And
It
how
may
much?
turn out to be a few $1,000s less than that, But,
So we have to amend the motion, number one, vote on that motion, and then vote to accept the $75,000, correct?
vote to authorize the release of $75,000. That's already in the motion. It approves the use of funds from the trust, which is a requirement of the trust itself. So that's already in the motion. You just need to amend the amount to $200,000.
Okay.
And how much is in the trust?
440?
Yeah, it's-
440,000, I think.
That's correct.
Started out at 40,000.
Started out at 40,000 and it's now built up to 440, and then we'll take the 75 off of the 440?
Yes.
Okay.
But just by the terms of the trust, they have to keep 30,000 in the trust principal. So,
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Very good. Well, Ms. Leclerc first?
Really quick, will the town own the entire piece, will the trust own a piece?
Trust will own nothing, the town will own it all, but it will be under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt.
Just real quickly, I agree with Jim that we should, run to close this deal. So please don't take this question as anything other than just a inquiry. Does buying this add any liability to the town? I don't know if open space makes us any more liable or less liable.
We have a lot of open space.
No, I know, exactly
So
right.
you're adding another 2 acres of open space, whatever that, I suppose anytime you have open space, there's always some risks, but
Not
we handle
significant.
that. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Any comments from the public? Okay. We're going to make an amendment, and then we need to vote on the amendment, and then we'll go back to the motion. So I'll make the amendment that we appropriate $200,000 as opposed to $275,000. So we appropriate $200,000 for the costs associated with the acquisition of real property and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. Do I have a second? Mr. Stone. Any comments, questions on the amendment? Mr. DeWitt?
Just, do we need to clarify that 75,000 will come out of that fund? I mean, it does say here, if approved, to be reduced by any sums allowed to be used.
Right. And
Do we not want to replace by any sums to 75,000, or?
I don't think you need to do that. I
No?
think that as long as you appropriate the 200,000, we already have the 75 committed from the Conservation Trust, so we should be all set.
All right, I'm in.
Well, we approved the release of the money, not at a specific amount.
Yeah.
Well, you're saying it's in the bonding resolution.
Yeah, they just give me, I just.
So can it hurt to put it in there?
Couldn't hurt, right? That's what
Yes.
It's okay.
That's what they're talking about. He's saying we don't have to. Are we with the original opinion?
Yes, it's okay, the way it is.
Okay, so we can vote on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? It's unanimous. So now we have to go back to the motion. Okay. So we have a resolution appropriating $200,000 for the costs associated with the acquisition of real property and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. Can I have a second? Mr. Mottola?
Mr. Chairman, just so that the record is clear, you are approving the resolution that's item number 2 on the agenda, the entire resolution?
That is correct.
Okay, and then that also provides that you are approving the bonding resolution that went along with that.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Comments from the public? Okay, we're ready to vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who moved to approve the amended?
I did, and then Mr. Mottola seconded.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Mr. Stone, actually.
am I right about that?
I thought it was Bob.
No, that was
That-
to amend it.
Right.
This was to approve the amendment,
Okay, we're on to item number 3.
the amended motion.
Right, right.
To hear consider and act upon the appointment of the auditor for the external audit. And I'll turn it over to Mrs. Leclerc, the chairman of our audit committee. Do you have any comments?
I do have a question for Mr. Mayor. Is the cost of the audit within what we approved in the budget?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we received the engagement letter from our auditors, Cohen Resnick, and for the fiscal year ended 6/30/15. We need to approve the auditors by the end of June. The engagement fee is $97,000, which Mr. Mayor has confirmed for us that is within what we approved for the budget. They plan to start, I guess, the end of the summer and finish probably by the end of December. We need to, I guess, discuss the timing of the reports for the actuary and OPEB, PEB, and the pension with Mr. Mayor, that those reports are done in time for the auditors.
Those conversations are already taking place.
Okay, great, thank you. The only thing that's new this year is GASB 68, which is that they have to report the pension liabilities, and that's going to be a little more time-consuming. And that's kind of laid out in the engagement letter, which appears to be an expanded version from what we've seen in prior years. And I guess that's, the audit committee will probably meet the beginning of September and sometime in December.
All right, thank you, Mrs.
That, I
Leclerc.
don't have anything else to add.
Okay.
And the only other thing I'd add is it's kind of like the piece of property, it's a steal this year, because we have 100 FEMA grants for the individual houses, and they have to audit each one of those as well. And it's included in the 97.5.
Okay.
So Mr. Santafonte will be our gentleman that we're going to be working with then?
Correct.
Is that correct?
And his staff.
His staff, if we approve. Any other questions, comments from anybody? Mr. Walsh?
A couple things. Bob, do you have any idea where these fees have gone over the last 3 years? Has this been steady at the exact same amount? Has it gone up by a percentage every year?
This is about 2.5% higher than last year, which is about 3% higher than the prior year.
Okay, so it's been going up between 2 and 3% every year?
Yeah. This year is, as I indicated, there's significantly additional work because of the 100 FEMA grants. So we're getting a good deal this year.
I didn't hear the end of that. What did you say?
So we're getting a good deal this year.
Okay.
'Cause 100, you know the homes that are in the storm district?
Yeah, where we're getting
Each of those
these
has, we're
grants
working,
in,
well, those
individual.
grants, those are all individual grants.
Yep.
Which are all subject to the audit.
Okay. Okay. And then in regards to the budget that just was approved, I don't fully understand what exactly happened, but the RTM seemed to cut some money, so I don't know whether there's money to put a person in your department, but we were advised while we were handling the budget at this table that if you were able to get another person, that they would do some of the work so that some of the recommendations that the auditor kept coming back for, we were not going to hear about again when the next audit came around. Are the funds that are in the budget that are available to your department enough to prevent some of those recommendations not to have to come back again?
We have additional funds which the RTM, because the RTM doesn't have the ability to transfer or add funds, they left a certain amount of funds in the staff position with the understanding they could be used for additional part-time or professional services, part-time help or professional services, which obviously we will utilize those and towards all the issues, not all the issues, but as many issues as we can address that were in those documents that we presented at that time. And I'm drawing a blank right now, is what's the One was grant accounting, and the other one is capital project accounting. And those certainly, I've already, started attempting to address that, or at least think about how we're going to address it. But we don't have the funds yet.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? When is, Mr. Mayor, do you know, when's the last time we put this out for bid? I don't,
I think it was 6 years ago.
6, 7 years ago. Yeah.
well, they do a very good job, but we
They-
may want to think,
Based upon the 6 years that I worked with on the Board of Finance, partially, and during much of that time as a member of the Audit Committee, these guys, they're easy to work with, they're competent, they're timely, they're service-oriented, and they do an excellent job. And I think Caitlin would say the same thing. Yeah, we're happy that you've chosen not to go out to bid.
how do we know, or how do we at least benchmark the $97,000? If you don't want to put it out for bid, how do we know we're getting, that is the right number? Other than he's going up 2%, that seems reasonable year after year. And if we don't know now, maybe we need to think about how we can benchmark it.
Okay?
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Ms. Sinclair, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to approve the auditors, Cohen and Resnick, for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2015.
I have a second. Mr. Walsh, all those in favor? Opposed? It is unanimous. Okay, moving on. Thank you, Mary. Item number 4. And can I get a motion to waive me reading the whole motion on the agenda? Mr. Mottola, and second, I get Mr. Stone. Okay. So what we have before us is, and I'll make the motion, I'll need a second, a resolution appropriating $3,088,000 for the costs associated with the construction of berm and pumping station, and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. Can I have a second? Mr. DeWitt?
Procedural thing.
Yes.
Even though we had a first and second not to read it, I think we still have to vote on it. Nothing not to read it.
Okay. So let's go back.
Just to tidy it up.
Just so that the record is.
Let's do that. Okay, we had a motion to waive the reading. We had by Mr. Mottola, we had a second by Mr. Stone. All those in favor? Opposed? Very good. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And I just read the motion as stated. And did I have a second? Mr. Stone? Okay, this item's before us.
Okay. Thank you. Joseph Michelangelo, Director of Public Works. During Storm Sandy, as you know, the whole beach area was inundated, flooded, and including our wastewater treatment plant. So this is just an aerial map which shows a wastewater treatment plant. Basically, it's on both sides of Richard White Way, One Rod Highway. So if you ever visit the transfer station, before you take the left there's the plant on the right and the plant on the left. So during Storm Sandy, as we all know, we got flooded. And this is the current flood map for Fairfield. And you can see the different zones. So the pinkest one is elevation 13. And then, this is the worst part, the peninsula, which is elevation 15. The basic beach area, even all the way almost up to Old Post Road in a lot of cases, is elevation 11 by the current ones. But the wastewater treatment plant is this area over here, which is at elevation 13. And you can see this high spot over here. This is the Green Cycle site, which sits quite large. So that's basically the only area in the beach area which does not get flooded because it sits high. And this little lobe over there is the former transfer station, the one that's sort of behind Mona Terrace and the school there. So those are the highest points. They don't flood. But our wastewater treatment plant elevations didn't reach 13, but they reached approximately elevation 10. And I got what we did at our plant just to show you what elevation 13 would do to us. We went through a bunch of our buildings and we put little hash marks. Our surveyors went out there. We put little hash marks where elevation 13 would be potentially. And once again, elevation 13 is, in my opinion, somewhat conservative because we're right up against we border the 15. So obviously the water won't, it's a mathematical model, water won't take a drastic step down. But I'll pass these out. You can peruse these if you have any questions.
What does the 13 and 15 mean? I'm sorry.
That is the 100-year flood zone elevation. So when Fairfield experiences a 100-year flood, according to mathematical model, along the peninsula, the water will get to 15. Over
15
here-
feet above sea level?
Correct, 15 feet
Oh.
above sea level. Over here, 13. Over here, 11. And that's why in the
So
beach...
you want a low number. Lower number is better. That means it's never going to get there, right? So
Well-
in the white zone, it's never going to get,
Correct, it's never going to get that high.
never a positive number.
because
Okay.
This sits at elevation 30, so it's never going to get that high. That's why it's
Got it.
out of the flood zone.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Are these all the same? Yes, they're all the same package. There's a series of about... There's a series of photos there which shows where elevation 13 is in relation to the buildings. So during Storm Sandy, if you could just interpolate, and there's people in the pictures for scale, if you can interpolate where 3 feet is below there, you could see there were places where water did come into some of our buildings. It was on all the grounds. In some cases, it came into some of the buildings, into the pump stations, affected the process. So the way our homeowners in the beach area, as you know, are dealing with it, they're raising their houses above that elevation 12 or 13 or whatever the zone is in their area. Well, the wastewater treatment plant is largely a subterranean operation.
Can I ask you a quick question on your photos? There's like fluorescent marks on here, on each of these buildings. So if we had 100 years. On the buildings that you have, there's some fluorescent markings
Correct.
that are on them. So at a 100-year flood, are you saying the water would be at the height of those fluorescent markings?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to be clear and make sure I understood what
Correct.
you were saying.
Yep. And during Storm Sandy, it was 3 feet below that. So if you look at the cover picture, that's a 6-foot tall man. So, elevation 10, which was Sandy, was probably around, waist high over there, which got into that building, which got into the door. So even during Storm Sandy, we were fighting the water from infiltrating our process. Okay. So the way homeowners have dealt with this is raising their homes above the base flood elevation. With the number of buildings there and the type of buildings there, we can't do that. So the strategy to protect the site is to protect it with a dike, a berm, to encompass the facility. So this is an engineering map, and you see it's basically a little more than a semicircle, but on both sides, it ties into high ground, which is the Green Cycle facility or Harvest New England facility now. So there'll be a continuous wall at some elevation, obviously 13-foot plus, to protect us from Long Island Sound surges. There'll be a bowl, so the only water that we'll see is rainwater from the sky, which will be evacuated from the pump, and there'll be one pipe in of sewage, one pipe out of sewage, treated sewage discharge, and basically that's the only penetration in our protection around our facility. So in December of this year, this was one of the projects, the many projects that we started formulating ideas, thinking about, and moving them forward after Storm Sandy. And one of the opportunities that came along was the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Relief Opportunity. So we applied for this project, for this hardening project of our critical facility, and in December of 14, we were awarded the project at a 75% share with a 25% local share.
So let me just clarify what Mr. Michelangelo said, so we understand. The resolution's for $3,088,000. We've been approved, correct, for a State of Connecticut CDBG grant, a Community Development Block Grant, for 75% of the cost, which is $2,316,000.
Correct.
So the town share is 25%. It leaves $772,000. Now, from what I understand, the WPCA said that they would split that 50-50. So the 772 of our share will go down to 386,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the town share, and that would come out of their fund, correct?
It comes out of their fund balance, which has been accumulated through their sewer user fee revenues.
And how much do they have in that fund balance?
Just slightly under $4 million.
Right. So the town's share of this project ultimately will be $386,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Any questions on that or comments, Mr. DeWitt?
I'm just trying to understand this map. Where's Rod Highway on this?
One Rod Highway
Yep.
splits the site in half. So One Rod Highway, and I'll try to talk so I got the microphone there.
Yeah.
One Rod Highway here is from Reef Road. It cuts the site in half, and then it goes to the transfer station.
Okay.
And one thing I didn't mention, by nature of connecting the dots to the Harvest New England site, it also encompasses the new fire training center, the conservation garage, and the animal control center. So there is, just by nature of, by building it, they will be encompassed too. So there are some co-benefits to it above and beyond the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay. So that's what I thought. So so I guess what you're saying here is there's an opening that is One Rod Highway. That's the only, the dark line is the wall or the berm, right?
Correct.
So you don't expect the water to come from Veterans Field. You expect it to come from the backside. Is that correct?
Well, it will come from all sides. And so when you're coming from Veterans Field, one of the things that you'll do is the road will be regraded. So the road will rise at approximate 5% grade to that same elevation as at the berm, 13, 14, 15, and then it'll go back down again. And that's easily obtainable. And just to give you a sense of scale, the driveway that goes to the Green Cycle site,
Yep.
that goes to about elevation 24.
Yeah.
So that's pretty steep.
Pretty good pitch.
It's pretty good pitch, but this will be nowhere near that. Probably half of that pitch, because it doesn't have to get that high. It doesn't have to get to elevation 20. You only have to get to elevation 15 as an estimate. And then you touch back down, and then when you go back on the north side of the property, same thing. You'd rise up, and then you'd rise down. You go down again.
So the berm, so I'm looking at the cross-section of a triangle. That's the berm.
That's a berm.
How wide is it at the base?
And once again, that's not the scale. That's just the schematic of it will be. But yeah, but in some cases it'll be very wide, on the order of 50 feet. So there are locations where we'd have to build a wall per se with a smaller base, and that would be a typical wall with a footing, and a vertical wall, most likely concrete, 12 inches thick with the reinforcement.
So my question is, well, my first question is, when you're coming down One Rod Highway, the first thing you see in your right are condominiums.
Yep.
So have those residents looked at this and realized that there's going to be this big wall with a big grade behind there or to the side of their properties?
Now, where the grade would start, it would probably be a good 1,000 feet to the west of their driveway. It's well beyond where those condos are. And
Really?
yeah,
They
correct.
seem pretty close, but maybe I could be wrong.
And I could go back to the aerial, and we could orientate ourselves from there. Yeah, so the condos are over here.
Yep.
So, we'd probably pick up the grade. If we have to go up, even if we have to go up, 8 feet, we can make that up in 200 feet, which is, probably only that distance. So well short of the condos, we'd start rising up, and then we'd go down, and same thing on the other side.
And our conservation friends are okay with that? Because that's a marsh area.
Correct.
In between the condos and what you're talking about is, well, there's marshland all around it, right?
Yeah, we'd have to go through, we'd have to go through the permitting process, not only local, but with the state DEP also.
Wow. And who would accomplish this work?
We would have that work, everything, an engineering firm would do the design work. So this map was performed by Ty and Bond, who we selected through a town RFQ process. So they would do the engineering of it, which is covered in the grant, and we'd go out to bid, and it would be for a contractor would construct it.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Leclerc, did you have a question?
Quick one. How do we know the 50-50 split is the correct split between the WPCA and the town? Do we know what the ratio is that we've used historically, or do we have a ratio on water usage? What part is collected and what part is town use?
Okay, well, in deciding on this specific project, there was the thought that there are other town properties involved in the project, but, one of the exact wording was it's more art than science as far as coming up with the division. But, historically, one of the things that has happened is the town government side has paid for a larger portion of the WPCF expenses. And, in one of the things going forward with the sewer authority, one of the things they're grappling it is the whole financial picture. There's a lot of projects ahead of us, and the sewer authority is more like a utility, like a water company or gas company or electric company, than any other business the town creates. So one of the things they're struggling with is pricing their commodity right, so they could afford to be self-sustainable. And I'll use the example of a water company. If somebody calls up the water company and they want to build a high water usage location, well, the water company's thrilled, because if you price your commodity right, you could generate revenue and sustain your business there. So that's one of the financial issues that them and this board will have to struggle with going forward. What percentage, who pays what?
Okay, so do you know at this point in time, like what percentage of the water is from residential users who pay for sewer usage versus town and people not connected to the sewer?
And just, from our sewer user fees, we raise basically our operating budget, which is a little over $5 million, and that is raised through residential homeowners, which is, 17,000 plus homes are connected, and basically all of our commercial and industrial is connected, and the only ones that aren't connected is probably about 3,000 homes on subsurface systems, septic systems.
Right.
So, and those are largely, the unsewered areas are largely in the north of the Merritt, Greenfield Hills, the western part of Southport.
Right. But then there's all the town facilities, the schools and the,
Correct, yeah.
so you don't know a breakdown between what percentage?
Well, just by those numbers, probably 85% of the town of Fairfield is served by sanitary sewers.
Including town buildings, though?
Correct, yeah, just about all of our town buildings except for the ones, north of the Merritt are. Well, Burr School is served, but.
Anything else? I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, maybe Mr. Tetro, the town attorney was asked the same question, and in regards to a letter addressed to you, for April 28th, what entity pays for construction of sewage treatment facility? And his opinion was the WPCA doesn't, I mean, to answer the question of Mrs. Leclerc about how do you get to 50/50, one of the answers is they didn't have to put anything in. Is that correct? Am I reading this opinion correctly?
Yeah, I think that Town Attorney Lesser looked at that, and like many state statutes, we're finding that it says a lot, but not necessarily enough in the specific area you're looking in. There's some issues as to whether it's new construction or maintenance in terms of what's taking place, expansion of the system. I think the practical side, having listed, Selectman Kiley is the Board of Selectmen representative on the WPCA. There's one member of the Board of Selectmen who is asked to sit on this board. At the Board of Selectmen meeting, he described the discussion that took place, and they talked through looking at ratios of linear feet, trying to establish what was protected, what wasn't, and as Mr. Michelangelo mentioned earlier, they kind of decided there isn't a really solid objective way to do this, so they felt it appropriate to look at a 50-50 split on this. And that's at the Board of Selectmen level, we listened to that description of the discussion and thought that was a reasonable way, that we didn't go back to try and divide up how much of the business is this, how much of the business is that. One of the things that happens is organizations like Fairfield University, the state, with the service areas along 95, are basically not taxpayers, but are users. So they get charged user fees as part of this, even though they don't pay taxes to the town. So by including a certain amount of this to the WPCA, in essence, Fairfield University and the state are helping pay or fund part of this back through their user fees.
Okay. Does that help a little?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Leclerc. Any other questions? Mr. Mottola?
I think he
Thank you,
answered,
Mr. Tetro.
I think he answered my question. So the WPCA is paying half of the amount, which is about $368, and then the town is
They're paying half the match, and the town would pay half the match.
half the match, and we're bonding for that. But we have to, pursuant to the statute, the town has to be the entity that actually bonds for it. That's the way I read it.
Yes, the statute says a number of things, and Mr. Mottola, obviously I'm not an attorney, so I don't mean to overinterpret this, but it's my understanding this, the town puts forth its good standing towards the bonds and basically represents half the bonds. The WPCA in this case is taking it out of their reserves, but they could also pledge their user fees against that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Mrs. Leclerc?
Could I just ask you to clarify that really quick? So if we look at the bond resolution that we received, it says town share 25%, 772%. So WPC
$772,000.
Oh, sorry, 772,000. So we're going to collect from the WPCA half of that up front, so we won't have to bond that piece?
Correct. And Mr. Mayor, just to
So we need to
confirm,
make
that's...
an amendment, which we will.
And
Go ahead.
at the time of the Board of Selectmen passing this, we did not have the WPCA vote in terms of what share they would consider paying. So we could not include that in the resolution as it came to you. You certainly could modify this resolution to include that, so it's clear going forward as to what the intent is.
Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. I know the whole resolution isn't here, but we'll amend the 3 million to 2,316. Is that right?
We're going to amend the resolution to $2,702,000.
In there, will it specific?
Yeah, I'm not sure you want to... At some point, we need authorization to spend the $3 million. All right, we'll get part of that back in a grant from the state. Joe, that's reimbursed, correct?
Correct.
So we
So
get
is-
that
and I'm sorry,
back as a
is that-
reimbursement.
So that's where I was getting to. The total of the resolution needs to be at $3,088,000.
We need authorization to spend that much.
Right.
The sources of the money,
Right.
one of the 2.3 million roughly would
Right.
be state grant.
Right.
The other source would be 386,000.
Well, 772 divided by 2 between the two
386,000.
entities,
So
right?
one source would be WPCA and one source would be bonding by the
Right.
town.
Is that, well, again, because the bond document isn't completely here, is that specified in there?
I have the bond document, and I'd like to get clarification on that, because Mr. Mayor and I had a conversation.
Yeah, I was, part of the conversations I had with other people was that a part of the expense flow was going to go through the WPCA, which would require not require, but which would call for a amendment to the bond. But if none of the expense flow is going through the WPCA, then there's no amendment required or called for.
Yeah, I guess the way I looked at that is the WPCA was effectively a source of funding.
Right. Which
So it
works
would-
as well.
So it'd be a town project. They would in essence provide money back to the town. Part would be bonded, and part would be in a state grant. And we typically approve the entire expenditure so that we have authorization to do that and the funding comes in.
So my,
Okay.
but my question is when the full bond resolution, do we specifically list where the money's coming? I understand we have to allocate $3 million.
When we
$2
get-
million coming from this, because if we don't get, if the grant does, I don't know if the grant's totally approved yet, but if that doesn't come through, I'm assuming we don't do this,
The
right?
grant was approved about 6 months ago.
Oh, okay. So even more to the point, now we know what the number is. Does the bond resolution specifically call out the 3 sources of funds as you had just said?
Since that is a question about the bond resolution, and we happen to have a bond attorney here, I'm going to defer to the
I was
bond
dragging
attorney.
you up here for something tonight.
John Staffstrom from the law firm of Pullman and Cumley, bond counsel for the town. The bond resolution speaks in terms of the full $3,088,000 as an appropriation, because that's what you're appropriating. And the amount proposed to be financed is that same $3,088,000. The bond resolution does not speak to the sources of that. I think that what you might want to do is on the other part of the resolution, if you wanted to, you might want to build that into that part of the resolution. Typically, when you've done this type of project that's supported by a grant or by another source of funds, which in this case would be funds from the WPCA, you still have authorized the full amount of the bonding to go along with the appropriation. And the reason for that is if you decided to start the project, Mr. Mayor and I discussed this earlier today, if you decided to start the project but the grant money wasn't there, you then could use other capital funds to start the project that would be reimbursed for the
Reimbursed
grant.
later.
And without the bond authorization, you really couldn't use those capital funds. So typically, what you've done in this situation, you have funded the full amount. Now, if you wanted to be clear that that a portion of this was coming from the WPCA, I would suggest what you probably would do is amend the resolution, but not the bond resolution.
So when you call the resolution, that's the first 1, 2, 3 pages?
Yes.
Yeah, understand. I think that's, yes, I agree. That seems like a better way of doing it than allocating through the
Yeah, I mean,
the formal bond
the
resolution,
reason
because
for you
that
need
makes
the
sense.
formal bond resolution is there
Yep.
may be a timing issue involved, and you want to make sure you have enough money to start the project.
Mrs. Leclerc?
Don't we usually attach it to the back of the bond resolution, how we want the funds to be spent or where we want them to come from?
I
think
don't,
We
I
have a
don't
history of
recall
that.
ever seeing it. but-
Simply no. I think what you're thinking of is the non-recurring projects that we do where we'll have a bond resolution and then we'll specify the specific projects we want them used on and the dollar amounts per project. We changed that process a few years ago to be clear, and I think it was at Mr. DeWitt's initiative that we looked at specific projects. In this case, I think specifically an oil tank cleanup project that generated that request. And
Right.
we all thought that was a good move. Well,
we-
it just had appeared, I believe, 2 years in a row, Mr. DeWitt, and your notes caught that.
What I want to be clear is that, like, we don't expect all these funds to be spent, that even though the bond resolution says X, that we only plan to spend Y on it, and the other sources of funds are available and where they come from. Because in the past, things have changed and we don't actually get what we think we're bonding. And so I want to figure out how to button that up so we're spending exactly what we think we spend.
And that would be a, if I may, that would be something new that we've never done. I mean, you know, you take these school board, school bonds, for example,
Yeah, we
$15 million, we say $15 million.
No,
We-
we've always
we authorize the entire thing. There's always backup attached, but the
Correct.
bond resolution itself specifically only authorizes, not only, but the only thing it does is authorize the full amount of the project.
Yeah. If I might, I think your point refers to another type of situation.
No, there should be a final page, and it should say, as attached to, and on the back of it, it should list.
In non-recurring, that's exactly what we do. This is a slightly different
But
situation.
I think it's on all bond resolutions that we've
Like on
signed.
schools, we don't even know how much we're getting. We guess. We don't know. Be impossible.
Correct, because we don't know what the reimbursement
And
is.
we've never done that.
But we usually have a budget or,
You have information, you have expectations, and the execution of the bond goes through, is done in accordance generally with those expectations. In my memory and history here, I don't remember ever not getting money we thought we were going to get, because it's usually grant funds that are granted prior to the bond resolution being approved. But we don't, as the first selectman indicated, if we're going to do 200,000 on a bridge, 200,000 on a cul-de-sac, 200,000 on a truck, that would be attached to, with specificity in a what do you call it, non-capital projects authorization, but non-recurring authorization, but never in a bond. Have we done that? Never in a non-recurring bond.
Mr. Tetro?
If I might, I think because we know what the output is. It's the berm.
correct.
All right, there's not, no disrespect, Joe, but there's not a lot of moving parts to that. It's basically pretty clear, pretty straightforward. So we know what we're getting. I think the clarification, if I understood you correctly, that you want to make sure
Is the
is that
fund.
we don't spend all the bond money, or we don't bond all the money because we have other sources of revenue. So I think the point would be to, as Attorney Stafford said, leave the bond resolution as it is. However, be clear and modify the resolution, as Mr. DeWitt was pointing out, to say, it's been agreed or stated that $382,000 would come from the WPCA from their funds. $382,000 is expected to be bonded, anticipated to be bonded, and the balance would be good. It could be potentially bonded, but it would be reimbursed by the state. So even when we do bridges that are 100% reimbursed, we always authorize the full amount for the bridge, authorize bonding for the full amount, and then get the money reimbursed by the state.
In this case, anyway. Are you comfortable with that, Mrs. Claire,
All right.
in this case? I understand what you're saying in other cases.
And certainly, after this meeting or away from this, we could go back and look at prior bond resolutions to clarify, to make sure that we're talking apples and apples here, to take a look at those to see if there's wording in there that you're referencing that we just don't remember off the top of our heads.
Right, well, I understand like a simple grant, like for a bridge or whatever, like that is what we've done. but because the funding's coming from another source, that's what
Typically,
I
there's a
wanna
clause,
clarify.
even in a bond resolution, and specifically at schools is where it happens a lot, there'll be a clause within the bond resolution that says, you know, any additional funding or grants that can be applied to this will be. Even if we don't know what they are, where they are, it says that we're allowed to apply those, and that would let us bond less coming out of that. And there's kind of a generic boilerplate clause that's included in most of the resolutions that allow
But
for that.
that's what I want to make sure that it is applied to, like, so that the funds we receive from the WPCA are applied to this bond resolution.
Okay,
We'll
then I
clarify.
would put that in there, that it's anticipated that
Can clarify, okay.
$382 would, or $1,000 would come from the WPCA to support this project.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
And just to be clear, it is in their minutes, they did pass a formal resolution stating that.
I mean, number 12 on the letter could just be amended to say town share, 12.5% cost share, WPCA 12.5 cost. And then this is affixed to the formal bond resolution, so, I mean, I'll make the motion to change that if you're,
Mr. DeWitt, you keep that in mind when we come to make the motion.
you got it, Mr. Brown.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Walsh?
The berm that's going to be built, you have pretty good confidence regarding its reliability when the storm hits?
Yes, we do. And one of the things that, in my previous town of Cheshire, which was on the Quinnipiac River, which is the shaded area there was a Army Corps built berm, pretty simple device, and that keeps the Quinnipiac River on one side, the plant on the other side. So that's, you know, this is literally the aerial of the thing. So you can see that, you know, this over here with the dark green and the slopes being the light green, that's remarkably similar to the design that we have, except in the tight areas. Like I said, we build a vertical wall, and yeah, it's just like any other dam would work for you know, reservoir or any type of levee system. But
So in the areas where you build the wall, you have to build some type of foundation underground,
correct.
similar to like the piling systems that are going to be used down at the beach?
They might have to be set on driven piles, whether it be wood or steel.
Okay. And you said the width of some of them could be, did you say 1,000 feet?
No, and when, you know, the side slopes you want to build approximately at 3 to 1.
Mhm.
So if you're, you know, if you're rising up 6 feet, you probably have, you know, 18 feet on both sides. So the base would be about 36 feet if you have to rise up 6 feet. But once again, it would be engineered, permitted both locally and on the state level.
Okay. Based on the elevations that you know of, obviously they're going to be different elevations once you're on property because the elevations are different, correct? What's it going to look like in there? Is it going to look like 12-foot walls, or is it only going to look like 4-foot walls? Where you're barely going to see it because they slope up so gradually?
On the beach side, you probably won't see it. And there's an area, you know, there's a high area over there, and I'll point to it. You know, right over there, there's an existing high area, which, you know, I defy anybody to know that it's been there for 30 years. I don't think anybody knows that it's there. And even, you know, over on the other side, there's another high area. It's not the kind of thing you notice. And the existing plant on many of the sides has sound barriers, which are even higher than the ones that you typically see on a highway. So, you know, the ones facing Longdean, and even to the north, like facing Veris Park, so to speak, there is, you know, they're probably 24 feet high easily. So this won't be as high as that.
Okay. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions?
Can I ask-
Mrs. Cleary?
I think it's okay, but within a bond this over 20 years, the life of this project exceeds 20 years?
Yes, well over 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. Claire. Any other questions? I'd ask for comments from the public, but there isn't anybody, so we'll come right back to the board. Now, we have a motion on the table, right, that I read. So, Mr. DeWitt, you want to amend or add on to the motion?
I guess I'm adding to the motion to amend the bond resolution, item number 12 under financing, to now read, town share is 12.5% cost share at $386,000, and adding a line that says WPCA share at 12.5% cost share at $386,000. Deb, I can give you my markup, that helps. And that should, that will account for 100% of the allocation of financing.
Okay, do I have a second to the amendment? Mr. Mottola, any questions, comments on the amendment? So we're going to vote on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? It is unanimous in favor to the amendment. So, Mr. DeWitt, can you read the motion? Right here. You can start with this and then add on to what you're saying.
Do I have to read the same?
Just the top part.
And that's the new, no, so that number will not change?
No.
Okay. So I make a motion, we pass a resolution appropriating $3,088,000 for the costs associated with construction of berm and pumping station, and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. In addition, in the bond resolution letter, amending number 12, financing, town share, amended to 12.5% cost share at a value of $386,000, and adding a new line to read WPCA share at 12.5% cost share at $386,000.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Can I have a second? Ms. Cook-Lippman? Any questions, comments from the board? Okay, we're ready to vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It is unanimous. Thank you, and you can't go anywhere. We have a microgrid to talk about. Let me just put this to the side. This is item number 5. Can I have a motion to waive the full reading? Mr. Stone, I have a second. Mr. Mottola. All those in favor? Opposed? Very good. So before us will be a resolution appropriating $2,500,000 for the costs associated with the installation of microgrid and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. Can I have a second? Mr. Stone? Mr. Michelangelo?
Okay. This is another community development block grant, disaster relief grant that we were awarded in December of 2014. Unlike the other one, this is fully 100%, 100% award for the project. And if the board recalls, we have a similar project nearing completion at the police station, fire station, Operation Hope Complex. And the purpose of these is to allow critical facilities to run in an island mode off the grid in the case of some sort of natural or man-made disaster. So when we applied for the 2 years ago, when we applied for the emergency services grant, we also applied for this under a different program. And one of the reasons it was rejected was because it was a 100-year floodplain. So I should have mentioned this before, but one of another co-benefit of our hardening plan is it makes this complex eligible for the microgrid now. So we got 100% grant for the microgrid project. Mr. Bowman wasn't able to be here tonight. There's about 10 slides there that he used in other presentations. That gives a description of it. Once again, this will not only serve the Water Pollution Control Authority, but it would also serve the other complexes, fire training, animal control, and conservation garage. And it would utilize existing generation facilities, plus all of the, or many of the green power that we have on site, distribute them to the facilities during an emergency basis, which will allow it to run in an island mode for up to a 30-day time period.
30? You say 30?
30, correct, 30 days. That's the criteria. So same thing with the police fire complex. And you know, Mr. Bowman goes into it too, but because you have the control system there, it'll provide other benefits when we are even not during a power outage. So because of the control capabilities and the interconnections, it'll be the brain that selects which power to use, whether you use solar, whether you use the microturbines, or whether you use different kind of generation capabilities, even when there's not an outage. So there's additional benefits, not just when there is outages.
This is 100% reimbursed, zero
Correct.
cost to the town, just for clarification. Mr. Dewey, you had a question? Yeah.
Two questions. I appreciate the fact that it's 100% funded. What is the long-term maintenance? I mean, there's free and there's free, right?
Mm-hmm.
The installation's free, and then the next 50 years we pay to have the turbines, you know, right. And then my second question is, WPCF, how much of that is electrical? I mean, are the pumps all electrically actuated? Are they, you know, hydraulically actuated? What?
No, they're electrically. So,
Okay.
so any, the wastewater treatment plant uses, more, in any town, wastewater treatment plants use more electricity than any other user in town. So even with the cost-saving measures that we implemented in the last, dozen years, electrical usage is probably, 15% of our cost, upwards of $700,000 a year down at that facility.
So without this microgrid, power goes off down there, there's no wastewater treatment. It just stops, right?
No, we do have emergency generator capabilities, but once again, the emergency generators down there are not designed for 30 days, so they will be upgraded. They're emergency generators, are not standby generators. So they do have to be upgraded, and they will run off natural gas as opposed to the, which is a permanent, hard connection, as opposed to a diesel type generation capability where you're reliant on delivery. So we had that issue during Sandy. We had to coax Santa fuel to drive through, 18 inches of water through the back way just so we could get through days 3 and 4 without power.
Okay. So so my original question, what's the long-term maintenance cost or preventive maintenance cost is probably a better,
Once again, we're in that business anyway. We do, we have preventative maintenance of all the generators on site there. So that's
the microgrid's no different?
Correct. It won't increase our maintenance cost on those items.
It won't decrease it either. See, because my issue, I should issue a stronger word than probably it needs to be, but I appreciate that the other facilities like the fire training and animal shelter and conservation garage are going to be powered by this, but if the fire training facility doesn't have power for 5 days, they just don't train. It's not a huge big deal, right? I mean, of the four, the WPCF is by far the most important of that whole thing, right?
Correct. But one of the things that is desired and even an important part of microgrids is that there's co-benefits. So, so there are multiple facilities served. So the more the better as far as in implementing a microgrid. I don't know of any that was approved for a this is, this is the first round of microgrids. I think there was probably about 6 or 8 of them approved. So this is literally the 7th or 9th. And I think all the applications I saw had multiple sites served. So that's one of the, I wouldn't say hook, but that's one of the enticements, that there's as many properties as possible benefiting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any other questions from the board? Sorry to argue with 100% reimbursement, I guess we're saying. No questions, no comments. And I take it none from the public. So back to the board, we ready to vote? The resolution's before us. So all those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. You've been doing a very good job getting grants for us lately. Thank you.
Yeah, and, Ed Bowman has done it for years. The Sandy work, a lot of Laura Pooley, our senior civil engineer, has been with the town for about 25 years. She's probably the most instrumental in getting every grant we've gotten since Sandy. So,
Well, your department's been doing a very good job.
thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Sixth and last item on the agenda. To hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to transfer $457,468.87 from contingency to the information technology software in the fiscal year 15 for the license payment per the attached backup. So this is a voting item. That's the motion. Can I have a second? Mr. Mottola, this is now before us. Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Several months ago, came to my attention that the town was behind in its payments for software licenses that it uses for the daily operations of all of its activities. And so we went through a process to where we determined the type of licenses we needed and the number by type, the best way to acquire the necessary licensure. And then we entered into negotiations and executed a contract with Microsoft and CDW for $1,372,000 at $457,000 per year for 3 years. The contract gives the town the right to use all the licenses it was using at that time, both for the past, the present, and gives it all upgrade rights for those licenses for 3 years. With us here today is Dan Sigmund-Palia, who is a member of the IT department, who is here to respond to any questions you might have about the technical aspects. That is the type of licensing, the number of licensing, and what the licenses do for us. He is not a member of management, is not here to discuss management issues. Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would you like to add to Mr. Mayor's comments? Or am I putting you on the spot here a little bit?
At this time, no, but yes, I'd be happy to answer any questions that we
All
have.
right, thank you. Do we have any questions? Mr. DeWitt?
Just one question, too. You said these are for licenses and, I don't know what words you used, eligible upgrades? Is that?
Yeah, any major upgrades, that come out for all the licensures we have
Okay.
for the next 3 years.
Oh, so for 3 years, these are, for the existing systems we have, we're covered for upgrades, and so we're all cool. We don't buy any more computers, we're all good to go.
Technically, even if we buy new computers, this is basically for software that people use on a daily basis, such as MS Office, their email rights, things of that nature. Basically, as those systems go out of support from the manufacturer, and they come out with new products, this contract will actually cover us to upgrade to their newer versions.
And is there a number of specific seats covered under each license, or is there a?
Correct. We purchased approximately 570 seats for the MS Office suites, approximately the same number for email usage, and basically server connectivity. With Windows systems, basically you have the right to run the server, but actually for a user to actually get to the data that lives on the server, they actually require a license for that.
And we use 570 today?
Approximately, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
Is this the licensing for everything we need, or are there other licenses we still need?
There
to
are other
purchase?
licenses that we do use. It's for other pieces of software. This is primarily Microsoft licensing.
Okay. So are we in the process of doing this for the other licensing software that we need? Adobe, other things?
We are evaluating any software that we are deficient on at this point. There are some other products I know that will be purchased in the future. And there are some projects that are ongoing that we may need a different type of license for, not necessarily a Microsoft license, but a license from a particular vendor.
Yeah, I think there were it was about $10,000 worth of other licenses that we paid for to cover current utilizations of some other licenses. It's like close to $10,000.
That was in this money?
No, it's in addition to this.
In addition to this, that we've already sent out the door and paid for? and
Yeah, we
stuff?
paid for that out of directly out of the IT budget.
Okay. When are we going to have a handle on everything else that needs to be purchased, so that we are completely?
Well, no, this is it. And then- well, what this didn't do, this covered us right then. What we did do, Dan and I, when we were talking about this, is when we realized the situation we're in, we put a hold on adding any new licenses. So this covered everything we had, but then right after we did this, we added,
Approximately 40 new users came on as a project from the fire department to add a bunch of new users for our volunteer fire department to actually connect to the public safety systems. At that point, we needed to actually up our count from what we had on the initial purchase, and we added those 40 licenses to actually let those users gain access to what they needed.
so what we
40
did.
new computers?
Not computers, actual people.
Okay.
They're actually contacting systems within the public safety department, and they're actually going to have an email login so that they can actually log into pieces of apparatus that'll be on the trucks.
So what we're doing now is tracking all new licensors, and every 6 months, we'll send in a check for everything that we've added. Because we add ours. Dan can explain how that works. But we add ourselves, and we're not in the cloud, we're not in subscription agreements, cloud subscription agreements. So what we will be doing now is tracking all new, and then every 6 months, sending in a check to pay for what we've added.
So, as we sit here today, other than the 40, which, have we paid for those 40 people?
Those have actually been added. It's what's called the Microsoft True-Up. They actually roll this into the agreement so that it'll actually in future years they'll just count those licenses for us. This allows us a lot better management tracking. Basically, we can look on a Microsoft website. It says you've got exactly this many licenses.
Okay.
When we, during our audits of people, computers, and things of that nature, if we find that we're deficient in any one, we can actually send them confirmation that we need additional licensing, and it will just get rolled into this agreement.
But as we sit here today, you believe that we have paid for every piece of software licensing that we need that is on the town's, all the town's computers?
I will say that as far as I know, yes.
Okay.
If someone, the town becomes responsible for anything that's installed on a computer, so if a user actually installs a piece of software that the IT department's unaware of, when we run a software audit, we would catch it, but at that point, we're technically responsible for it. As of the last audit, this agreement will cover us for all the software that's out there.
All, not just Microsoft, all.
Once we pay this last part that we're working on. We had a user count increase in our antivirus product. So we're going to have to cover those licenses, and that is actually an agreement that is currently in the works.
Okay. And that's the last piece of it?
Last piece that I'm aware of, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other comments, questions? As far as a contract like this goes, and the rates, the market rates, is it favorable to town of Fairfield, or?
Yeah, I think, Dan took the lead on a lot of this, and he did an excellent job. In fact, when this went through the budget process, because that $457,000 this year, next year, the following year, some of the RTM members who believe, not who believe, but who apparently are involved in the IT world, indicated that they checked the pricing and found it to be excellent.
Okay.
And they were Republicans.
Yeah, just as a
For you, Bob,
clarification.
right? You got a compliment from a Republican on the RTM?
I was very proud.
Just as a
It's even a
clarification
more
on
legitimate
that.
study then. Thanks, Bob. I'm glad.
I'm sorry, just as clarification on that. Yes, we worked with a reseller, and we actually get a special grant as a federal or government entity. And we work off a Connecticut state contract, which actually puts us at a lower rate than basically any individual.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you for staying, thank you for being here, and thank you for answering our questions. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. So this motion is before us. Are there any other comments, questions, one last time from the board? If not, we ready to vote?
Yes.
All those in favor? Opposed? It is unanimous. That is the last item. Is there any new business? Although I do have a question, or, oh, Mr. DeWitt, will you raise your hand? Oh, no? Just a question on the news release, press release from GE, maybe Mr. Tetra or Mr. Meredith, they made in regards to the proposed state budget, and basically gave a shot across the bow. And they made reference that they may think about, as well as other companies, leave the state if the budget goes through and there's these proposed tax increases go through. Do we have any discussions with them? I mean, not just now, but at any time, as they are the #1 taxpayer in our town. Do we have any type of relationship with anybody there? Or is there going to be any type of communication in regards to this comment, or maybe something to our state legislatures?
Oh, let's see, from the top. One, I've been meeting with representatives of top taxpayers, our top 10 list, for the last 4 years.
Okay.
And specifically GE as part of that. I had a conversation with GE today specifically about that. So that, and yes, and back and forth with the state delegation in numerous phone calls as we're going through this. And specifically, GE very definitely wanted to send a strong message, and they did just that. And I think that when you heard the other messages from Hartford, I think the business community in Connecticut was talking, very definitely sending a message back about some of the proposed changes that came up over the weekend in the budget. I think there were two issues there. One is they came up at the 11th hour, so to speak, in doing this, didn't have a chance to get fully vetted by the business community in terms of evaluating those and looking at the impact that they would have. And it's my understanding, at least in reading the blogs on the budget and not having been in any of the caucus rooms or have any update from there, that there have been some significant changes to the budget based on the response from the business community.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Walsh?
Well, it'd be helpful if some of those discussions happened in public. And it'd be helpful if the business community had an opportunity to weigh in on them at public hearings, which they did not get to do.
No argument. I would.
And it's been unfortunate because like a GE or some of the other businesses that have come out have to actually like have press conferences and things to basically get their positions out. It's been, and for them and for what that business does to this town, it's significant. It's significant, and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of thought process on how that will impact businesses throughout the state, and trying to make a more business-friendly state, and what it does to, we're just one town and one business. I mean, this could happen with United Technologies, Sikorsky, and other business communities, and for it to be coming up at the last hour and behind closed doors, I found to be a bit embarrassing for this state.
Yeah, I suspect there's a lot to the process. It's certainly not the way we do things down here in Fairfield. There's certainly a lot that we don't understand about Hartford, how Hartford works. But I think that there's no question that Connecticut needs to find a way to start moving towards a more business-friendly environment. I think that was the upshot of not only what GE said, but several of the insurance companies in Hartford have said the same thing, and I think they're the ones speaking up. I don't think there'd be a lot of argument from other businesses out there. I think that at least in some way, and again, I have the same access to details that you all do in this case, but at least in some small way, I'm hearing that Hartford is reacting, and they're starting to change some of this. The tone of the conversation with the GE representatives today was very open, very plain, very straightforward. There wasn't any animosity, that type of thing, but they were very clear on what is driving it. It's a numbers game from their standpoint. And they're looking to see that they don't want to move out of Connecticut. But if the numbers work out that way, they certainly would evaluate that. And I think that was the key phrase used in each of the press releases that I read, was this would cause a reconsideration or a reevaluation of what their long-term commitment here is.
Well, I would agree that companies generally don't want to move out of Connecticut, but they certainly will move out of Connecticut, and they have. We've moved them, our company. And we move them to Texas, we move them to North Carolina, we move them to Florida, we'll move them to Tennessee, and it's unfortunate. But what we'd like to do is move companies into the state of Connecticut. But lately, over the past 8-10 years, we've been moving companies out, and then people follow. I mean, we know Connecticut is ranked right now, according to CEO Magazine, 45th of the best, worst states to do business in. CEOs don't move into states that are the 45th worst states to do business in. They move into Texas, which, in spite of the floods and the tornadoes, they don't worry about the weather, they worry about the business climate, and they will move. So it's good that at least Hartford listened, at least, I guess, are listening. We're not sure what they're going to end up doing yet, but if it takes a GE or an Aetna or Travelers to say something. I mean, a lot of small businesses try and speak up as well, and we hope that they get listened to, as well as the GEs and any other major corporation. But thank you, Mr. Tetreault, for answering. Are there any other comments or questions? Mr. Stone?
I just want to commend Mr. Brown for, I saw it on YouTube, his testimony in Hartford. It's sort of just what you said now, and it was really excellent. Apparently they weren't listening. We find that out, but maybe they are now with GE and Aetna and the other corporations speaking up, because this is a real critical tipping point. You can't have these companies leave, and we also have to attract new businesses. And no one's going to expand here if the tax environment stays the way it is.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Appreciate it. Okay.
That's good.
Any other comments? Any new business? Thank you, Bob. Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Mottola, second, Mrs. Cook-Whitman. All those in favor? Opposed? Good night. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jim. Good meeting.